Okay, we are recording. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kelly Frank. I'm the Director of Collegiate Affairs here at Quaker Valley High School. And it is the Junior College Search event. Every year, I try to gather juniors' topics together and try to invite somebody from the college side of the desk to help us get started. Now that November 1st has come and gone, the majority of our seniors have at least a few applications submitted. So I can devote some time to juniors, which I'm happy to do. And as juniors are just getting started, it's important to start thinking about how to look for schools. Maybe some of you have toured, maybe some of you are thinking about scheduling a tour um, in the near future. And there's just probably a lot on your mind as you're nearing the end of our first trimester of junior year here. So thank you for joining us. With me tonight is Miguel Alvarez, and he's the Director of Access and Opportunity at Carnegie Mellon University. He's also one of our enrollment managers, and he's been visiting Quaker Valley for many, many years. Miguel, I don't even know how long you've been visiting QV at this point.
I think it even for my so I've been at Carnegie Mellon 10 years and I think I visited Quaker Valley even one of my first years. So,
Oh, wow.
wow.
Good to know. So yeah, I asked Miguel if we could definitely, tackle some topics for juniors. And then if people have questions, they can feel free to ask me as well. The chat should be open. Feel free to use that. And I have our recording on. So Miguel, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kelly. I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you all. And excited to get to be a part of the beginning of this journey with you. This is a pretty exciting time, getting the opportunity to explore what colleges and universities and opportunities are going to be out there for you all. So really delighted to get to take part in that initial conversation with you all. So hopefully this will be beneficial to you all and we'll be able to answer some questions along the way. Bear with me one second. All right. So, as Kelly mentioned, my name is Miguel Alvarez. I'm the Director of Access and Opportunity at Carnegie Mellon. I also serve as a Tartan Scholars Recruitment and Enrollment Manager. So really my job is to travel around the country, travel within our local community, visit high schools, meet with students. I get to meet with students and families here on our campus and in my office in the admission office here on our campus. I also have the opportunity to be a part of like some of the admission evaluate application evaluation committees. So I get to review applications and then meet students as they get admitted and transition and enroll here to the university. So it's a little bit of the work that I do. Like me, there are a ton of admission professionals around there. So I hope you'll also remember that you can always engage with admission counselors like myself. Whatever colleges you're ultimately thinking of, you're gonna find people who either have maybe Pittsburgh or the Pittsburgh suburbs as their recruitment territory, or maybe they're experts in the academic field of study you want to go into. You can always reach out to admission offices. Of course, you have Kelly there who can also help you begin to think about some of those connections you may want to make. But just always remember there's admission counselors, people you can call and reach out to begin asking questions throughout your time searching for colleges. So really for this presentation, the way I'm kind of thinking about this is I want to make sure you all have the initial ideas of how exactly are you going to begin developing your college list? How exactly are you going to begin entering this process of deciding what types of places are going to be the right fit? There's somewhere around 2,000 different institutions around the country of higher education that you could potentially explore. So how exactly do you begin to narrow down where you want to go? What sort of ideas and concepts you get to think about? And one of the really exciting things is that this process for both student and family is a great opportunity to be able to learn about what exactly it is that a student really wants to do and what's important to them, what are their values. And I think all of those types of things will help you kind of figure out what institution you ultimately may want to go to. But in order to do eventually land at an institution, you do have to kind of navigate the process and the larger higher education landscape. So in order to discover what are going to be some of your areas of interest, you got to start thinking a little bit about a few different categories that can help you define how exactly you're going to search for institutions and discover institutions. So first thing when it comes to fit, we're going to talk a lot about fit, and ultimately that's your goal, right? Finding your fit and finding that community and the academic opportunities that ultimately match up with what you're trying to accomplish. The first big area of consideration when you're thinking about discovering an institution that is going to align with you and fit is going to be academic fit. So as you're beginning this process, without a doubt, you cannot ultimately think about college and your a time at a university without considering what is it that I am interested in? What is it that I want to study? What sort of environments do I learn best in? And so you can see here, if you're thinking about college, you may want to start thinking about what classes do I really enjoy in high school? What are some of the career outcomes that I'm looking for? What do I want to spend my time doing in the classroom for the next 4 years, right? Because you have to sit through these classes. So although the outcome could be one, you also want to make sure you find areas where you're going to be able to sit through the classes and enjoy what you're learning for the next 4 years. Even if you don't know what your major or program is going to be, thinking about whether you want to be in an environment with a lot of students or a much smaller campus community. Do you want to be in small class sizes, or are you okay being in a classroom with 100 or hundreds of people even for your potential area of study? So you want to be sure that you're thinking about some of these different pieces. Coursework, rigor, how challenging is that environment going to be? How much is it going to push me? How much interaction do I have with faculty members? What's the overall learning environment like? What are the mindsets of students that I'm going to be around? And then also thinking about the different curriculum types. One of the things to consider when you think about universities is there's a lot of institutions where you may get admitted to the university as a whole. There's some institutions where you get admitted directly to a college, and somewhere you're applying directly to a specific major. So it's going to be important that you begin to explore what are the differences in the academic experience, depending on some of the different schools you might be interested in. Other things to consider when you're thinking about fit is going to be the environmental fit. So you're going to want to make sure that you're also thinking about a few other things when it comes to your selection of schools. So you will also want to consider location. So how close am I to home? Am I in a urban city environment? Do I prefer to be in a more rural area? What is the weather like? All of these really important dimensions of the overall college experience. It might not seem like it, but I would definitely make sure you're thinking about how close do I want to be to and from home, and consider the ways that you ultimately get back home as well. Do you want to be on a flight, go somewhere where you can get a direct flight to back home to the Pittsburgh area, or you may have to go somewhere that has a layover. You may have potential other potential considerations when it comes to transportation. Do you want to be at driving distance? Whatever it may be that's best for you and your family, you may want to think about some of those things as you're considering environmental fit. Safety is also another potential consideration for students and families to consider, and just everybody's got an individual sort of perspective on how they feel related to safety and relative safety, and what they're trying to understand when it comes to safety, and what institutions do to be able to make sure that students are cared for. Diversity can also be another thing, right? So you may want to make sure that you're with students from, international backgrounds. You may want to make sure you're with students from around the country. You may want to be around students who represent different marginalized and underrepresented populations. Whatever it may be, diversity is also an important thing to consider, but also what sort of networks and systems are in place to support that diversity, and that growth and development in identity is also really important. Not just is there diversity, but also how much do institutions support the idea of belonging and making sure that students can discover different groups and organizations that will help them grow and foster that identity. Do you want to be in a competitive environment, a collaborative environment? To some, it may sound as though obviously you may want to say, well, competitive means that it's going to be a negative environment. And that's not really the case. You may want to go to an institution where maybe a large number of students are pursuing that major that you're pursuing. And so it may be a little bit of a competitive feel. However, it could be that by being with students who are in those really pursuing those majors, maybe those students are really pushing you to think in really deep ways about that area of study that you might have interest in. So a lot to consider there in terms of, do you want to be in a more competitive environment, collaborative environment? What is the classroom experience like? But just the overall feel within the community, something that will be important to ask different students or tour guides, which we'll talk about as you begin visiting schools. Environmental fit also considers opportunities outside of the classroom. So this could be opportunities, whether it's in the city or community that the university's in. It could be clubs and organizations that are right there on campus. You want to make sure you're discovering what those groups are. You may want to think about athletic and sports opportunities. There may also be considerations for campus life and housing. So if you're looking for a specific type of dorm, you need specific have specific needs or accommodations, whatever it may be. These are the types of details you'll want to begin digging into when it comes to environmental fit. Some may be more important than others, and that's going to be up to the individual person. For some, maybe location isn't as important as a club or organization. Whatever that is for you, you want to make sure you're really focusing and narrowing in on the schools that are going to provide you with that specific area within environmental fit. Another potential consideration is financial fit. One of the big things about higher education is it can be a big investment for not only in time and commitment, but also in financial fit for a student and or family. So families do want to consider the affordability of that institution. Does the institution offer scholarship opportunities? Do they have financial aid that is need based? Do they meet 100% demonstrated need? These are all concepts and ideas and topics and vocabulary that you're going to see from different institutions. The two main things that you'll definitely want to consider are an understanding of merit-based scholarships as well as need-based financial aid. You'll want to kind of understand those two concepts within here because financial aid is not necessarily going to be the same at each institution. And some institutions, for example, may have merit-based scholarships, but a place like Carnegie Mellon, we do not have merit-based scholarships. Everything that we do comes down to financial need. So these will begin to be terms that you'll see, and will begin to give you an idea of how does financial aid work at X institution. So it'll be another important concept that you'll want to consider as you're going through the process. Um, Loans and debt and how and what type of financial aid you receive will be important. What is the overall all cost of attendance? And it's really important to remember cost of attendance and not just tuition. Tuition normally is the biggest factor that many of us hear about within the cost, but at the same time, remember that cost of attendance also could include things like room and board and other fees that could be associated with attending that school. Lastly, you always want to consider return on investment. So, of course, there's an investment that is made to be able to attend an institution, but at the same time, you also want to ask questions about what will be the return? What's the success for students who graduate from X institution? So, financial fit will be another important consideration. Ultimately, as you begin thinking about what's important to you internally, doing this internal dive, you'll want to think about some of these different concepts, but you'll want to make sure that you are really combining this list and really thinking about all of these different pieces and prioritizing all of them, especially when you're thinking about spending 4 years at an institution. You want to make sure not only that the academic piece is there, but also that the financial piece works out for you and your family, but also that the environmental piece is there. So you can't really focus in solely on one of these areas. You really want to make sure you're considering all of these in terms of eventually discovering what could be the right institutions for you. So the first piece is really that fit portion, which talks a lot about ensuring that you are doing a deep dive internally about what type of place do I really need to be able to succeed. Once you've kind of done that internal dive, it's a great there's great opportunities to be able to then begin exploring what sorts of places will begin popping up that align with what my own internal values are. And there's a lot of sources out there, obviously, to be able to engage with lists of for colleges and find institutions that could align with your needs. Obviously, there's a lot here. For example, here are some potential resources. Obviously, one of the big ones and mo more popular things that exists out there is obviously to look at rankings. Of course, rankings can be a way or a method to be able to begin to understand higher education. But if we're being extremely honest, we got to make sure that we always come back to the reality, which is that we each as individuals have different needs or different perspectives on what is a good fit for ourselves. So rankings by themselves cannot necessarily match or align in the same way for everybody. So you have to make sure that you're doing your own deep dive of what values you have. And ultimately, again, you can use rankings as a way of beginning to get introductions and beginning to understand the higher education process. But ultimately, you don't want to use it as your sole way of really discovering institutions or prioritizing which ones you're going to be applying to. But it's definitely one of the tools that does exist out there. Other things to consider as you begin to, and I know you all are just kicking off this process, but as you begin to think about where else can I do research and how else can I, discover information about universities, one of the things that's obviously going to be a place you'll spend a lot of time is going to be online researching on these different university websites. You'll begin to discover a lot of universities do a pretty good job of listing a lot of their policies, a lot of these details that we just covered in terms of fit. They try to list these on their websites to make sure it's accessible to you and that you can really find which schools are going to align with you. You can also, a lot of institutions are doing a lot in social media, so definitely go and follow some of these universities online. One of the other things that I think is going to be really important for you all, and that I do encourage, is making sure you visit some of these college campuses. The visit is going to allow you the opportunity to really get a hands-on feel for what is this campus environment like? What is the community like? What is the overall aesthetics of campus? What could be a dorm or a housing situation here at this institution? What's dining like? And it also presents you the opportunity to potentially take campus tours where maybe in some cases current students will actually lead those tours and they'll be able to provide you with a lot of in-depth detail of what it's like to be a student at that institution. And you'll be able to ask questions that might be specific to your needs and wants for your college or university experience. Tours are something that colleges offer. Every college is going to offer a campus tour. In most cases, those are going to be led by tour guides that they have. So it's a great opportunity to be able to sign up for a tour, get a feel for campus, and then hear from current students. The other thing that you might not be able to see as well here behind this is information sessions. Information sessions are another event that you could potentially sign up for on a college campus. That is going to be more of a formal presentation. So not only if you visit an X college, for example, like a place like Carnegie Mellon, you could do our campus tour, but then you could also schedule the opportunity to do an information session. And an information session is basically where you go into an auditorium and you get to hear this hour long, 45-minute long presentation from an admission counselor or from current students or a combination of both, where we get to go and cover as much depth about the institution as possible. So that can also be another great opportunity. You also want to make sure to explore, depending on the college you're applying to, things like interviews, counseling sessions, any other opportunities that they might offer you. I think those things will be important considerations. Um, Along these lines, you may also see opportunities to connect with academic departments or colleges. It's probably best to explore through the admission offices of these universities whether or not you can actually connect with some of the specific academic areas of interest that you might have. They might have either connections or ways to facilitate some of those conversations. You'll also notice a lot of colleges and universities, for those of you, for all of you in this case who are in your junior year, you'll begin to get access and invited to open house events for the colleges. When you end up on their mailing list, eventually, most of these colleges are going to hold open house events. In most cases, for example, we just held ours this past week, so a lot of universities will hold open house events potentially or in the fall of your senior year before the early decision application deadline, which, for example, just passed here in November. So there are open house events where you can really get to come in with and spend a day on campus, and that those events tend to be a little bit more comprehensive than just the traditional regular visit on campus. There's also now for you all in this world, we're in a virtual we're in a world where virtual presentations are also very much accessible. So feel free to explore the admission websites and see what presentations are available. I will mention one thing along that goes along with all of these different ways to connect with universities. Some universities offer something that's called demonstrated interest. What demonstrated interest ultimately is it is a extra sort of consideration in the review of your application. So what demonstrated interest is anytime you connect with an admission office or with an admission counselor or visit campus or attend any of these events, engage in interviews, whatever it may be, they're going to use that as one factor within the overall admission process. So they may keep track of engagement and connections to be able to ultimately use that as one factor within their overall review of applications. Some universities have demonstrated interest, some do not. For example, Carnegie Mellon is an institution that does not have demonstrated interest. So we do not, we do, of course, still track when you register for events, all that good stuff, but it's not going to be a factor that we're using in our evaluation of your application as it may be at some other institutions.
Miguel, that's such good information. Do you know how a family or a student schedules a visit to a campus? What are the options there?
Yeah, so I would say online you're gonna if you go to a lot of the campus or the university websites, most of them should have a visit tab of some sort, and the visit tab on the admission website, usually you'll be able to get to admission and then to like a visit tab, and then you'll see a myriad of options depending on what they offer. So online is a great option. In a lot of cases, I will say always be mindful that it's probable that depending on how far out you're trying to plan for, it could be that they don't have those dates yet. So if you're not seeing a date on there that matches up with when you're trying to visit or sign up for a specific event, you can always then call. I would say calling a lot of admission offices, we tend to have teams that are available to answer questions and specifically answer questions about visiting and signing up for events as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. So, moving on from there, where to apply. So, as you're considering, then you've done an internal deep dive in terms of what's important to you. You've begun the process of researching and trying to discover ultimately what universities are out there and getting an idea. You're going to want to make sure that you cast a pretty wide net. And ultimately, the goal is to eventually get to a point where maybe, and Kelly, you can tell me how you feel about these numbers, but maybe where you're applying to upwards of 6 to 10 schools, somewhere within that range, and thinking about what institutions really match and align with your ultimate interests.
Yeah, I do think 6 to 10 tends to be the sweet spot for most students. Everybody has their own journey, right, with this process. So I would say if you are an athlete hoping to do a sport in college, you might have a few more. If you are a student who is going to pursue the musical theater world or the world of acting that involves auditions, you tend to have a few more. And if you're a student who wants to apply to what I would call highly selective colleges, you tend to have a few more than 10, since many of those students are in kind of a wild card situation, and we just don't know often, how those highly selective results will turn out. I tend to consider anything highly selective, Anything that's less than 25% admit rate, that's in my mind a highly selective. And we can talk about this a little bit more later in the evening as well. But the one thing students don't get to know as their application is getting reviewed is how a college is trying to craft their class. So looking at admit rate should definitely be a piece of the puzzle for most students.
Yeah, awesome. So narrowing your list. So how exactly do you narrow your list? And so as you think about this process, you'll want to make sure to consider the earlier criteria that we mentioned. As Kelly was kind of talking about as well, you're going to want to make sure you have a variety of choices. And as she mentioned, it may impact then the number of schools you're also applying to. Um, you want to make sure you're considering schools that really line up with some of those the criteria we went over when it comes to fit, but also make sure that you have a range of different types of schools, right? You don't want to have an entire list of solely highly selective schools. You want to make sure that you have a mix of different institutions within there, and that's where some of the research that you've done potentially earlier will maybe come in handy. So some of the things to consider as you're potentially narrowing your list or trying to build your list of what schools are going to be kind of either looking for or how to determine whether some schools are going to be in the really selective space or whether they're your highly selective schools on your list or the more middle of the road schools. You'll definitely want to be considering academic considerations. So there's ways online in most cases, or you can connect with some of these colleges and explore, how does your GPA sort of align? How do your test scores align? That will be an important way to kind of determine and see where you fall in terms of competitiveness. You'll also want to make sure that you're something else that you all are considering is the reality of the world you all are going into when it comes to the test optional policy. So before COVID, I would say, we were starting to see a movement by many institutions to move into a test optional space when COVID hit, though that immediate class that went that applied to college right after, those were the classes that we saw really shift into a pretty much exclusively test optional world. From that point, though, a few years after COVID, we then started to see a shift when it came to policies related to testing and now we're in a world where some universities require tests, some universities do not. Some universities are optional, some universities have test flexible. There's all these different policies that you may run into when it comes to test optional. So you will want to make sure you're looking at testing as a potential consideration as to, narrowing your list and also deciding where exactly that university is going to fall. So that will also be another important piece. You'll want to make sure that you're considering academic requirements or prerequisites. So some universities, depending on your major or area of interest, you may have to have specific requirements or prerequisites that you are considering um, in order to be able to enter into that field of study. Other things that you may want to take a look at for specific colleges is what is that evaluation process going to be like? Do they use holistic review? Do they, you can ask a lot of admission offices. Do you read applications by territory of where I am in the country? Do you read applications by major and area of study? Do you use holistic review? Are you going to look at the whole application, or are you following more of a specific admission process where you're looking at GPA and test scores and making decisions mostly off of that? Right. So you want to make sure that you're really taking a look to see what is the institution going to look at when they look at my application. In a highly selective world, that's also something else you can look at, as Kelly mentioned. You want to make sure that you're looking at what are some of the acceptance percentages for these schools. In a highly selective world, I will say for academics, some things you want to consider are making sure that you're challenging yourself as much as possible within your specific school environment. So I do think your class selection, depending on what it is that you're trying, where it is that you're applying to, could be an important piece of the conversation to have with Kelly, especially as you think about this year and potentially what you'll close out high school with as well. Those will all be the types of things you'll want to consider as you are thinking about different universities. The last thing that you'll want to make sure to be very familiar with in the academic space are deadlines. So one of the things that is really important to begin to familiarize yourself with are the range of deadlines that can exist for different institutions. Some institutions have very strict and straightforward deadlines for applying to an institution. Others have a little bit more of a rolling plan. Others have early processes that differ, whether it's early decision or early action. Early decision, for example, is a binding process, while early action is not. You have regular decision, which is not a binding process, and it's the process where you're applying and you're waiting to hear back, but you're not notified of your decision earlier. In some cases, you can only apply to some schools early versus not. So all of this is to say there's a lot when it comes to deadlines. I will say deadlines will be one of those things that as you're building out your list of institutions, you'll want to make sure you're taking a look at what are the different deadline plans that institutions offer and make sure to have an idea of when you'll have to complete your application by. But that's going to be something you'll want to work out and work through. I'm sure, Kelly, that's one of the main areas that you're kind of navigating with many students.
That's definitely one of the things that we will cover when we sit down for the junior college meetings, and that those will kick off here right after Thanksgiving with this group of juniors. So, juniors, I'll be talking a lot about these plans in classroom settings and in our individual meetings. So, don't worry, it will all make sense to you very, very soon.
So we talked about plans and then what other opportunities are available. One of the things to consider as well is for some of these different institutions, there may be other academic opportunities. And so you may have to follow whatever process they have in place. There are some exceptional state institutions that offer honors colleges and opportunity to access a certain level of coursework that may be potentially more rigorous. All those types of details, depending on the school you're applying to, these will be some considerations you'll want to be making.
One thought I just had that I was going to mention, and I was prompted by a question not too long ago. There are a lot of tools online also to help students narrow down what they might be looking for in a college. Two of them that come to mind. So the Naviance program, all of our students have Naviance accounts, and if you've been at QV since middle school, you made your account typically in sixth grade. And that's our college and career search tool. So if you go into the college section of Naviance, they have a super match feature there where you can type in, here's the size I'm looking for, the distance from home, or some majors and things like that, and it'll make recommendations for you. Niche.com, niche.com is a Pittsburgh-based company. They've got a fantastic website that also rates colleges with different settings. Like they tend to get student feedback on the academics, the diversity level, the campus scene, things like that. And they give colleges a letter grade as well. And then College Board has that feature, ACT has that feature. So there's a lot of search tools online. I often will just Google if I'm looking by major for specific academic program, but I would start with Naviance since that is a program that has your information as a student. Your GPA is in Naviance as well as any tests that you've taken. So that's a great built-in tool to help you just get started in terms of an electronic search. And then, of course, I am happy to make recommendations on schools that I think would be a good match for you in our junior college meeting.
Awesome. So, let me double check here. So one of the things that I do want to be really mindful of is to say that I think as you're narrowing down your list, just know that you're if you're going through this process, you're going to have Kelly here as well to support. You're going to wind up with a list of schools where, you're going to navigate the process. You're going to hopefully get different decisions back and have different opportunities and options. And so, in all these conversations, in these visits, in navigating the research, ultimately the goal is to have a place where you're going to be able to be happy and develop a list that really, if you're going through the process and aligning schools with your ultimate values, I think you're going to wind up with a list of schools where you're going to be happy, and you're going to be able to succeed and make the most of it and get that return on investment. Definitely not. It's gonna be, I will say this is easier said than done. I totally understand. It's a big exciting moment in time, honestly. It is a really exciting phase of life, and a really exciting choice to be able to make. And if you navigate the process and you kind of plan things out and you think about it step by step, I think it can really be helpful, and you'll have choices, as I mentioned, to be able to potentially attend a choice that aligns with your ultimate values. But here's a little bit of information. Obviously, Kelly will have my info, and then I'll also share it in the chat at the very end. But if you ever wanted to get in touch with anybody at Carnegie Mellon, you can always feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to answer even general questions if there's ever something that you were really curious about that came up. But otherwise, kind of the end of some of the topics I wanted to discuss, but happy to answer questions or cover anything else, Kelly, that you were thinking also.
Yeah, one of the things that students at QV hear myself say and Mrs. Keller, who's our career coordinator, is that students should make sure they're spending time, building their resumes, spending time outside of the classroom in things that they're passionate about or, interests that they have. And it's certainly more important in my mind to have more significant experiences, even if that means fewer experiences. So, are there things on a student's resume that jump out to you when you're reviewing applications, or are there certain things that you feel like would be good tips for students who are trying to decide how to spend their time now that they still have a significant amount of high school left?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we do get pretty often. I get very often, for example, a student will come in engineering and say, you know, should I be out there pursuing something super STEM related that connects with engineering? Is that going to look favorable for you all? And to be really transparent, we are looking in universities, in particular, highly selective universities, are looking for all different types of people. And I would not spend time, personally, this is my advice to you all, I would not spend time trying to predict what an admission counselor thinks is going to be the best activities list or involvement list, or trying to match up 100% with what we as an institution would want to see. Rather, I think what stands out for students is actually when you are out there searching for genuinely searching for experiences that align with your interests, with your goals, and that help you kind of grow as a person or help you expand your perspective, your experiences, the way you think about things, your ideas. As long as your experiences, whatever you decide to be involved with, ultimately help you um, develop and grow as a person, and are giving you some insight that you think is valuable and beneficial, I would not even think twice about whether or not that's going to be something that a college or university is looking for. I would really lean heavily on, is this valuable to me? Because honestly, if you do that, when you do approach the admission process, you will have a lot of information and perspective or experiences that you're going to be then able to convey and use potentially in essays or in other ways. Um, but you should really be thinking about what is ultimately going to be something that will genuinely connect with me as an individual, and ultimately something that I want to do. I wouldn't worry about trying to connect with what an admission office ultimately, or what you think an admission office wants to see ultimately.
Such great advice. And again, just a reminder of how different this process is for everyone. Depending on what they're coming to the table with, what kind of student they are. Sometimes I find, a family maybe has attended certain institutions and they have ideals within the family. So, and then we do have a fair amount of first generation college students here as well at Quaker Valley High School. So it's a little different for everyone, but it's a really good idea for students to just really dial into what excites me, where do I enjoy spending my time, and am I surrounding myself with people that are helping me grow and develop as a person? I think that's a great barometer for the activities list on the resume. And by the way, there is a resume tool inside Naviance that our career counselor, Mrs. Amy Keller, has students update from time to time. But you certainly don't need Mrs. Keller to tell you to do that. Students feel free to jump into that resume tool and add to that anytime you've had any volunteering experiences or anything from the summer that you spend time doing. Part-time jobs are extremely valid experiences. I often have students say, I'm not overly involved in sports or student council because I work a lot. Miguel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up. So we've really expanded how we talk about activities. I would say maybe when I first arrived and started working in admission, I think we were starting to hear a lot within the profession and in higher education about really expanding how we view commitment from students. And that's ultimately the key, right? Like we're looking for students who are demonstrating commitment and demonstrating commitment to something. And that may be a part-time job, that may be support of a family member or a loved one. So that could be helping out at home with a sibling, whatever it is that you are committed to, that will be important. I always tell the example. I know it's not super relevant necessarily to everybody in Pittsburgh, but just to give you an example of what students encounter nationally, there are some students in, let's say, an area like New York City who, because of the magnet school that they're selected in or that they've been approved to go to, they may have to make a trip from the Bronx to Queens or Brooklyn. That could be an hour and a half one-way subway ride. The opportunity for that student to be involved in a lot of activities is not going to really be there. So we have to keep an open mind as admission offices and recognize that students are going to come to us by the time we see their application with a broad range of different experiences. And we're really looking for that commitment, right? And for some students, it's simply getting really that long trek to get to school. For others, it's a part-time job. For others, it's helping out at home. And for others, it could be a club organization or activity, and that's fantastic. Whatever it is great. But then we also are hoping that again you're growing and developing from those experiences, and I think that will ultimately pay off in the long run.
That's great. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of our families and students. We don't want to keep you all night. I know you have a little one, very little one at home, and it's just such an important conversation. And I'm so grateful that you were willing to spend a little time with Quaker Valley families tonight and help our juniors move along a little bit. And juniors, I'll be in touch with an email that'll have a Google form in it. And students and families will be able to select a time and day or a few times and days that work for them, and we'll sit down and we'll begin chatting about some options that will work for you as you continue to go through junior year. Couple dates for you as well, just because everybody's calendar fills quickly. January 28th and January 29th will be the National College Fair down at the Convention Center, down at the David L. Lawrence Convention Center. That's sort of like a morning session, an evening session, and then again the next day in the morning. And that's just another great opportunity to get some research done on majors, connect with college reps, ask them your questions, whatever they may be. And, the more research you do in the junior year, the smoother senior year goes. I think everybody would agree that starting early or starting now is a really good way to just ensure that senior year is as least stressful as possible. So again, Miguel, thank you so much for your time tonight. We're very appreciative at Quaker Valley.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for the invite. And it was great to be here with everyone. And thank you for taking the time to hear me out. And I'm excited for you all to get to jump into this process and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Take care. Bye.